it really is pretty interesting that we have a couple of guys, and I think this is true for a lot of the young quarterbacks, that we kind of really like. And so I think that's pretty notable as well.
Hi there, it's WAMC News Director Ian Pickus. And on this episode of the WAMC News Podcast, we preview the Super Bowl coming up on Sunday. The football world has descended on Arizona for Super Bowl 57. The Chiefs and Eagles, both 14-3, and Rihanna, undefeated, will take center stage on Sunday. The Eagles are hoping to win their second title since 2017, which would also be the historic franchise's second Super Bowl victory ever. The Chiefs are in the big game for the third time in 4 years. And it all comes after a challenging, but, as ever, record-setting year for the NFL. For a preview of the big game, I spoke with WAMC sports commentator Keith Strudler, director of the School of Communication and Media at Montclair State University. Hey, Keith.
Hey, it is great to be on, closing in on the biggest day of the year. And by the way, true story, I believe I will actually be on an airplane when the Super Bowl is being played. This is a true story. I am not going to be forgiven by my son. I don't think he has put the math together yet, but we are now lobbying a particular airline, Southwest, in case you're listening, who has a vested interest in pleasing the customer at this particular moment, to make sure that Fox is added to the lineup of networks available. Just a little tidbit, some context for how I'm going to be enjoying the game.
Keith, I'm sorry to say this, but I would take the under on Southwest getting you a live feed.
You never know. You never know. I think they've made it very public that they really want to do better. And what better way to make the public happy than to make sure that people can get really angry and aggravated when they're flying. I feel like there's nothing that brings people together more than realizing they just lost a lot of money on a Super Bowl bet. So I feel like this is a real opportunity for them.
Well, I wish you lots of luck in being able to see the game. Before we talk about the Super Bowl, let me start with the latest on a changing of the guard in the NFL, and that is the second retirement of Tom Brady. How are you receiving that news?
Well, I fully expect him to be starting for the Jets in a few months, so that's exciting. As we've discussed before, the migration to Florida usually only goes one direction, and once you get a taste for pickleball, it's hard to go back. So it's interesting. I've always said we should never tell athletes when to retire. They have the right to leave if they have the opportunity to leave on their own terms. And you'll hear that same rhetoric around LeBron James, and certainly Aaron Rodgers is going to have that moment as well. I will say it would be hard to not say at this point, boy, he should have done that a year ago. It's really hard, it's hard to not look back and say there was a fairy tale ending. I guess that said, I think it also speaks to the fact that he's not happy unless he's competing in some way, manner, or form. So this was the only way for him to stay happy. I mean, it seemed to have literally cost him his marriage, if not more. But I will also say that I think those of us on the outside put a lot more on legacy than those on the inside. And I think that's something that gets reinforced a lot, that the reality is they're not really concerned with how much we care about whether they left at the right time or what kind of movie it makes. These are professional athletes who care deeply about playing football and competing.
I can't believe I'm saying this because I watched Brady just absolutely beat my team's brains in every single year for 23 years, which is like a double NFL career if you think about it. But I wanted to see how long he could go. I had visions of Jamie Moyer and Julio Franco, playing in the big leagues until their late 40s. I think I will miss Brady being a part of Sunday football.
Yeah, everyone needs a villain, right? And so that's I too, as someone who is kind of getting up in years, was interested in seeing the limits of human physiology and science. It made me feel a little bit more virile, if nothing else. So he was kind of the modern day Kenny Stabler. The only difference was, Tom Brady did it with nutrition science and doctors and special training. And Kenny Stabler, of course, did it with a bottle of Jack Daniels on the sideline. So each their own way of extending the career. And I don't know that anyone actually knows how old Kenny Stabler was. I think he always looked at least 15 years older than he actually was.
Without Brady, obviously, on the sidelines in this Super Bowl, we do have two very exciting quarterbacks to watch. What do you think of the quarterback position in the big game, Mahomes and Hurts?
Yeah, well, this is actually some breaking news. I've been told that the Kansas City will be bringing Chris McCaffrey to play because that worked out really well last week for the 49ers, and so there may be some wildcat being run on the sideline. So from a more serious perspective, by the way, if you didn't enjoy that, you're not human. If you didn't enjoy watching that progression go down like we were watching a high school football game at some point, I will say this. Look. Mahomes continues to amaze, and I think we were all looking for, even though he's not that old, but a certain passing of the guard to the even younger, to the Josh Allens and so forth. But I think he is the real deal, and I think he has the opportunity to start to cement himself as one of, and maybe at some point the greatest, that's a lot to say at this point, but one of certainly the greatest that ever was. I think the performance that he had last week on one leg, I think cemented his place as one of the greatest competitors of all time. I don't think there was a way to get him off the field over the last couple of games. So I think that's certainly on the Kansas City side. I think there's an opportunity to start thinking about legacy already with Patrick Mahomes. And another interesting note with Patrick Mahomes, and I've had this conversation with some folks, that, you want to start to dislike the guy. And this is kind of the trajectory of athletes. Like, they're young and they're the upstarts and you cheer for them, right? And then they get really good. And I don't care if they're nice guys or not. You just have to hate them, right? And Tom Brady, of course, absorbed a lot of that for us. And I think Peyton Manning thanks God every day that Tom Brady was there so we didn't hate Peyton Manning as much. But it's really hard to dislike Patrick Mahomes. I really want to dislike him. He's too good now. But I can't. He's like we started to dislike Russell Wilson, but maybe there were some other reasons. I can't dislike Patrick Mahomes. Now on the Eagles side, certainly with Jalen Hurts, his story is fantastic, and I understand. Like, I kind of by nature I'm supposed to dislike anyone who played for Alabama, and I think that's fair. I think there's an opportunity to once again reinforce the idea that the quarterback position in the NFL is just incredibly cryptic in its predictive nature, right? And I don't, people were pretty disappointed at the idea that he was picked where he was picked. There was no real prospect for him to. The reality is, we just don't know, right? And I think we learned that. And I also think for Jalen Hurts, Mahomes is playing already for legacy. For Jalen Hurts, this is for respect. And I think the Eagles have done a nice job at using they don't respect us, they all hate us to their favor. And I will say this, I think we need to remind Eagles fans, we don't hate them. Like, it's not that we don't disrespect them. We just don't like the Eagles all the time. Like, we don't like you when you're good. We don't like you when you're bad. We think you're obnoxious. Like, this has nothing to do with the constitution of this particular team. The only other thing I'll say about the quarterbacks, and I know there will be more written about the fact that this is the first Super Bowl with two black quarterbacks playing. I think in some ways the fact that it is not a big story is notable, and I think that's obviously another sign of progress. But I also think, leaving that almost as a side note, they're both really likable guys. We're used to having kind of an archetype of villain as one of the quarterbacks, and maybe it's because Brady has been in every Super Bowl since the FDR administration. It really is pretty interesting that we have a couple of guys, and I think this is true for a lot of the young quarterbacks, that we kind of really like, and so I think that's pretty notable as well.
Here's another way, not to bring it back to Brady, but here's another way in which our just measuring sticks don't work anymore. I mean, I think it's fair to say no quarterback is going to get to 7 rings the way Brady did. Mahomes, to me, this is kind of a legacy game because I agree with everything that you've said about how he's revolutionized the position. And based on performance, he's really outgunned the young up-and-comers like Josh Allen and Joe Burrow so far, just the way he plays, even on one foot. But I get the feeling this is kind of a big one for him.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like 2 is the new 5, right? Is that like you hear, Aaron Rodgers is living that moment right now. And so 2 becomes a big thing, with the exception of Eli Manning, who has 2. I think when you hit 2, it's kind of like everyone is reminded that Trent Dilfer is a Super Bowl winning quarterback. So when you get 2, it starts to change the conversation a little bit, particularly in the highly volatile free agency landscape of the NFL, where the deck is inherently stacked against teams that win. I agree with you. I think 7 is bananas. I mean, it's kind of ludicrous. And I think in some ways, well, we keep saying that and then look at Golden State and look at Steph Curry. But I tend to agree with you that this game will in many ways be a legacy building game for Patrick Mahomes and for that franchise. And I think if he wins this, I think there will be a different arc to kind of the story of the rest of his career. If he loses, all of a sudden now it's going to be, is the window going to close? Is it Cincinnati's time? What's going to happen next? And particularly, the AFC right now is brutal. So just getting to the Super Bowl is kind of almost, no one can ever take that for granted. So I agree with you. I think the Brady era is, I mean, who wants to live off like soy greens and kelp and sleep in an air tank all the time? I mean, like no one wants to live like that. Like, that's crazy talk. So, I just think you're not going to see something like that.
No,
again.
I mean, it's hard to get there. And if you watch this cycle of NFL playoffs, the Chiefs needed effectively a very late penalty to set up a game-winning field goal. That was the difference between probably going to the Super Bowl or not. It's hard to get there. Let me zoom out a little bit and just ask you about the NFL season as it was up to the big game. I think a lot of people will remember the scary situation with Damar Hamlin for the Bills, and that will stand out from this year. What do you think the state of the league is nowadays?
You can lose a lot of money betting against the NFL. So I think it continues to be strong. The TV landscape will be volatile for the time moving forward, although it does seem that the NFL is doing a good job at pivoting and continuing to leverage opportunities on streaming platforms and the big tech players, whether that be, is Amazon or inevitably Apple or some of these other players in the space. It's hard to bet against the NFL, and college football is strong as well. And I think, you look at the foundation of the house, and college football, I think, is in many ways stronger than ever. The expansion of the playoffs will reinforce that narrative, particularly at the highest level. And I think everyone said, oh, the NIL thing is going to kill football. It isn't. It's going to kill certain parts of football, but it is certainly allowing for kind of stars to become more prominent and rise even younger. And so I think the state of football in America, leave aside the NFL, remains quite strong. I think they're doing a better job than they have historically in building up stars. That's always been kind of not part of the NFL vernacular. And I think that might be because they're becoming stars younger in college. The draft remains really popular. Like, look, and I will tell you, like, I went to my first ever Giants game this year because my 15-year-old son, Sloan, is a huge Giants fan. God bless him. And so we went to a Giants game, and this is, I know I probably shouldn't say this. I had a miserable time. Like, I was miserable. I was cold. People were cursing. Like, it was just, and I understand that's just it. Like, I don't even enjoy the game experience, but I will tell you, everyone else seems to. Like, so I will say, I was actually in Philly this past weekend for my other son. Of course, he's on the summer camp bar mitzvah tour, which if you're familiar, This is like, I apologize to the 99.2% of the audience that has no idea what I'm talking about. If your child goes to a Jewish summer camp in the Northeast, you do the circuit. And it's a summer circuit that takes you around the area where you go to bar mitzvahs every weekend within they have to be at least 2 hours away because they can't be close. And so you do this circuit, and Philly seems to be a magnet for us, or that area. And so we were driving home on Sunday at like 10, and we drove right by the stadium. There was a mile-long traffic jam at 10 a.m. to get into the stadium parking lot. And with all due respect, it was not Villanova basketball that was driving that. And so I think that the NFL as a property remains strong. I think, I don't want to say they dodged a bullet, and apologies for even the callous reference, but like with the Damar Hamlin situation, I think the conversation was very much a red herring on that. And I think the NFL, what they have avoided miraculously over the past several years is continued focus on CTE and those types of injuries, where not that long ago we were talking about that as an existential threat to the league and to the sport. I got to tell you, it seems like it's barely a whisper at this point. So with that said, I'm pretty bullish on the NFL right now.
Yeah, I will just say I could really take or leave the league. I think it's provided really exciting entertainment for most of the playoffs. I mean, the games have been great, but I don't think CTE, brain damage, the possibility of cardiac arrest on the field, I don't think that's a deal breaker for 99% of Americans. I think it's baked into our week. I think it's part of people's Sunday tradition in a way that like going to church used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would take a lot to dismantle kind of that as an American institution. And I agree. I think, people have accepted, look, you will hear things like, yeah, but they make a lot of money. Like that's become a trope. And so I agree. I think it's going to take a lot more. If the scientific, although apparently we don't believe in science all that much anymore, but if the scientifically established reality that repeated hits to the head are going to cause some long-term brain damage, if that doesn't allow us to kind of take a step back or cause us, really not much is going to. And so I think until there is a massive cultural shift in this country, which probably would take generations at this point, and given that the entertainment complex is what it is, and this is again one of the few properties that we consume both live, over, television, streaming platforms and so forth. But we also consume kind of in its entirety. And, even sports like basketball are increasingly consumed kind of in bite-sized bits. Everyone watches now like the 12-minute version of the game, which is just a series of dunks, right? And there's all these ways in which that's consumed. That's less so for the NFL because it is kind of essentially appointment viewing, and it's kind of part of our established routine. I'd also say we'd be remiss at not remembering that gambling and its legalization nationwide increasingly has absolutely changed kind of doubled down people's reasons and motivations to stay engaged with the game, particularly to its ending. And so I think there's so much wind behind the sails of the NFL and professional football right now, with the exception of the USFL, of course. I think that it's pretty well established.
Okay, Keith. Well, aside from the likelihood that your flight is delayed or your bags are lost, give me a Super Bowl prediction. Who you like?
It's a really tough one for me because I'm not a big fan of either team. And I've kind of lost all my teams because I grew up a Bucks fan and then an Oilers fan, and I just can't like the Bucks anymore. I apologize. That's the whole thing, the Brady thing, and it's nothing personal. That kind of soured me. And the Oilers don't exist, so that becomes And so I just cheer for Earl Campbell's uniform, and of course I have an old helmet of his literally sitting behind me right now. I can't believe I'm going to say this. I think the Eagles are going to win 34-31. I can't believe I'm saying that. I can't believe I'm picking the Eagles to win the Super Bowl. And then I will stay away from Philly for the next at least 96 hours following that, at which point it is safe again to enter city limits.
Well, I put you on the spot. I will just say for the record, I think The Eagles have not really played a bad game in a long time, and they're due for things to not go right, which they really need to win a Super Bowl. I like Mahomes on 2 weeks rest to get that ankle back in shape. So I will say, let's go Chiefs 28, Eagles 21. All right, that does it for this episode of the WAMC News Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. If you're watching, enjoy the big game. Until next time, I'm Ian Pickus.